Hello and welcome to game 64 of the Top Computer Chess Championships Premier Division. Finally, in their third encounter, Leela managed to win against Stockfish in a very interesting French defense. It was again a strategical masterpiece by Leela, but let's see how the game developed. We have e4, e6, d4, d5, and now with knight d2 we have a Tarrasch defense on the board. I covered a couple of games with knight c3, the Paulson variation, where black has this option of pinning this knight and threatening to take here and so on. And the winner where bishop b4 is one of the bloodiest variation in the French, and it's not to everybody's liking. So instead of knight c3, if white wants to avoid that, can play knight d2. And now, of course, bishop b4 doesn't make much sense because white can play c3, a move that it wants to play anyway, and win some time by driving this bishop back. And white is just better. Bishop b4 is a useless move in this variation. Now, instead of bishop b4, if black takes here, then of course then we get back into the normal Rubinstein variation, which is also possible from knight c3. But in this game, we have the main line of the knight d2, and which is knight f6 attacking the e4 pawn, and now after e5 we have knight d7, and the pawn of the Tarrasch is that this pawn is now not blocked, it can defend this pawn, and the Tarrasch defense main plan here is to defend this pawn with this knight going to f3, this one to e2, and then together with c3 white has a very good defense of the d4 pawn. And the regular plan of blacks of c5, knight c6 and queen b6 putting a lot of pressure on d4 doesn't work quite as well as in the knight c3 lines. For example, bishop d3, c5, c3, and now if knight c6, then white can play knight d2, and after queen b6, knight f3, and after they exchange the central pawns, we can see that white is very solid in the center. This pawn is adequately defended. b2 is also well defended. And in order to get some counterplay, black needs to play here f6 and try to collapse white's center. And here now after e takes on f6 and knight takes on f6, white is a bit better here. He has a good defense of d4, and e6 is weak in black's camp. Also the king side is weakened a bit, and after black castles, black gets the f-file, the semi-open f-file to work with, but the rooks are not so well coordinated with this queen, since there's this pawn on d4 very well defended by white. In this game, instead of this knight c6 variation, we have b6. And black's idea here is to exchange this inactive bad bishop stuck behind his central pawns here with white's very strong and good and active light squared bishop, which could be a very strong attacker here on the king side. So this is strategically a very desirable exchange for black. The game now continued with knight d2, and now we have bishop a6, and we have bishop takes and knight takes, and now this is the end of the book. And in this position, Leela continued with the development by playing knight f3, and now we have b5. And in this position, Leela evaluates this as +1 for white, while Stockfish thinks that this is completely equal. And in this position, the main moves are castles. The highest rated game is Nisipianu versus Yusupov from 2004, and there the game continued with knight b6, and then white tried to attack black's queenside pawns and tried to open the queenside while this king is still in the center. The game continued there with c4, black keeping it closed, and then after a takes b, knight c7, rook a5, we had queen d7, and now Nisipianu concentrated on the king side with knight f4, g6 and h4, and eventually managed to crash through on the king side, even though black castled queen side. But in this game, we have a completely new move instead of castling. Now, of course, taking here on c5 is counterproductive for white. It's just quite simply not good, because black has all these pieces trying to get to c5, and the only thing that keeps them is this pawn on d4. So taking here on c5 wouldn't be good for white. Now Leela played here a novelty, and it is such a strong move that I'm amazed that nobody played it. She played here h4, and this is a very, very strong move strategically. There are so many upsides to this move. First of all, she's threatening to play h5 and h6 and weaken black's dark squares here on the king side. Another idea is to play rook h3, rook g3, and put pressure here on g7, and we've seen her execute this plan quite a lot in other French defense videos. And if black wants to castle kingside, then this is the moment, because right now he can still play bishop e7, and after h6, h5 and h6 and rook h3, he can now castle. And then after rook g3, think about the defense on the h6 pawn. But in the game we had b4, and now Leela continued with h5, and allowing h6 would be very, very bad for black, so Stockfish played h6. But now came rook h3, and now it's not possible to castle anymore for black, because after bishop e7, rook g3 and castles, white wins by simply taking this pawn on h6, attacking g7, and white wins. So castling, not an option anymore here after rook h3. Stockfish played b takes on c3, and now we have b takes on c3, and now knight back to b8. Stockfish is rerouting the knight to c6. So this idea in the beginning with bishop a6 and exchanging this very powerful light square bishop on d3 is a strategically good idea, but now black loses time by rerouting the knight to c6. The game continued with king f1. Leela, of course, can't castle kingside anymore, and she definitely doesn't want to castle queenside, but she doesn't want to castle because one point of castling short is to activate this rook, allow this rook to get to the f-file, and then try to activate it somehow in the center. But in this case, this rook is already active and is even attacking on the king side, so no point in castling. Leela played king f1, and she's intending to bring the king to h2, where it will be completely safe. The game continued with knight c6, king g1, and now we have rook c8. Stockfish at some point will take on d4, and then this rook has an open file to work with. We now have bishop e3, Leela is continuing development, queen a5, and now Leela played here a4, gaining some squares on the queen side. By playing a4, she now gained a3 and a4 for herself, and she took it away from the black forces, of course. With the pawn on a2, black can get to those squares, either with the queen or maybe even with the bishop at some point. But with a4, these two squares are now under Leela's supervision. The queen went back to d8, and now we have rook g3, putting pressure on g7, and keeping these two pieces bound to their original squares. They cannot be developed at this point. The game continued now with a6, and now we have knight f4, cd, cd, and now knight b6. This knight is coming to c4, a very, very good square for that knight, especially now that the light square bishops are off. And in this position now, Leela continued with bishop d2, which is a very, very nice idea. So Leela has these two pawns here on the queen side, which are weak. They cannot be defended by a pawn, so they are easily attackable by black. And Leela's plan is to play a5 and put this pawn to a dark square, and then have this bishop go to c3 and defend both of these weaknesses. And then maybe this rook on a1 could do some other stuff, like trying to invade the black camp. So the game continued now with bishop d2, and after knight c4 we have bishop c3, and this bishop stays very well here. It's undefended, but there are two knights in between the rook and the bishop, so the bishop is safe. The game continued with knight e7. This knight wants to go to f5 and attack this rook. So we have knight h4, defending the f5 square. Of course, playing knight f5 still would be very, very bad for black. His king is still in the center, so he needs these central pawns to shield the king and defend it. Knight f5 would be a very, very bad idea, because this would allow white, of course, to break that pawn barrier, and now these two pawns would be very weak. And after queen f3, how do you even defend d5? It's just not possible. White would be winning here very, very shortly. Knight f5, not a good idea, of course. Stockfish played here rook b8, placing this rook to an open file. And now we have bishop back to e1, queen b6, and now a5, and here Stockfish played queen b5. Going to b2 is definitely possible. b3 and b1 are taken away and very well guarded by the white forces. b1 and b3 are nicely guarded by the rook and the queen. But b2 is available for black, but queen b2 would run now in bishop c3, driving the queen away anyway. So instead of queen b2, we have queen b5, and now after queen d3, queen b7, king h2, since this rook now is undefended, the queen went to b2, but now came rook d1, and everything is defended in white's camp. And the game now continued with queen b5, maybe trying to get this pawn on a5 now, since the rook is not defending it. But Leela here played rook c1, reminding Stockfish that opening up the queen side when his king is stuck in the center and these pieces are not working would be very, very bad strategically. And indeed, after knight a5 here, quite simply just exchanging the queens and then taking the knight and invading with this rook would be already a very good idea for white. This other rook could go to b3 maybe and threaten mates and so on. Black would be overpowered on the queen side and would lose. But even better than that is to take the knight out, and now after queen takes, just play queen d1 and allow this other rook to come to the c file and invade into black's camp. And black will be lost here very, very soon. So Stockfish didn't dare taking this a5 pawn, and he played here instead queen b2, attacking the rook. So we have queen d1 defending it, and now again bishop c3 is a threat, driving the queen away, so the queen went back. Bishop c3, queen c8, and at this point they both agree that white is better. Leela says plus 1.5, Stockfish agrees 1.3, so white is better. The game now continued with queen g4, putting pressure on these light squares and maybe thinking about sacks like knight g6. Stockfish continued with rook g8, and now we have bishop e1, queen d7 and queen d1, knight c6, and after knight f3, taking this pawn again would be a very bad idea strategically. These rooks could activate on the c file, and black would be in trouble. Black needs to keep the position closed. The game continued with rook h8 to guard the h7 square, since this queen could threaten to get into h7 and then attack this rook on g8. We now have bishop c3, knight a3, knight d2, and now the focus shifts to the queen side, and we have now rook b7, knight b3, and in this position Leela now has three main objectives. One of them is to place this rook to c3 and try to break into black's position on the c file. The other one is to attack the a6 pawn, and the third one is to jump with the knight to c5 when bishop takes on c5 is not beneficial to black, for example if it would lose this pawn on g7. And all of Leela's moves revolve around these three ideas now, and there's a big strategical battle here between them. Leela trying to achieve those and Stockfish trying to prevent it. The game continued now with rook c7, bishop back, making room for this rook. So we have knight b5 guarding the c3 square, rook b1 now, knight a3, rook back, knight b5, and now knight e2. This knight wants to come to c3 and challenge this knight on b5 and maybe gain the c3 square for this rook. Knight a7 defending the knight, f4, rook takes on c1, knight takes on c1, and now rook g8. And here Stockfish is hoping maybe for bishop e7 and bishop a3, but Leela played here queen d3, stopping that idea. If now this bishop moves, then again the queen invades to h7, and after rook f8 and rook g7, black would be in big trouble. So bishop e7 not possible, and these two pieces are still stuck on the king side. The rook had to go back to h8 to guard h7, and now we have knight b3, knight c7, and the bishop f2, knight c6, queen c2, again trying to get in c3 when black loses material. Knight b5, again stopping that. We have knight c3 challenging the knight again, knight back to a7, queen d3 attacking this pawn, knight b4 defends this pawn. But here now after queen b1, black is again in complete Zugzwang. It's amazing how Leela manages to force his opponents into positions where whatever they move is destructive for their positions. And here again, black doesn't have good moves. Leela has two ideas. One is knight a4 and then land the knight to c5. So black needs to guard this diagonal. Moves like knight c6 or queen c6 or this knight to c6 would all result in this knight coming to a4 and then landing on c5. And with a knight on c5, white would have a very easy time in then crashing into black's position. What else can black do? Well, knight b5 of course is again not good because knight takes, queen takes, and then rook c3 and the rook gets in. Rook g8 again allows this queen to come to h7 and win this rook. Knight c8 maybe, but this allows knight c5 again as in the game. So there are quite simply no moves here for black. Stockfish tried here queen d8 instead of knight c8, trying to get in this check and then taking this pawn with some complications, but Leela stopped that with king h3, and now black doesn't have moves. If this bishop comes out, then black takes g7. There's nothing to do here. Stockfish played queen back to d7, but this now allowed knight c5, and Leela is attacking the queen, is attacking this knight and the pawn on a6. Black doesn't have a choice. He needs to take that knight. But now after d takes on c5, this knight is still attacked. It has to be saved. And now Leela manages to take on g7. And black's position completely collapses here. The game continued with knight e7, maybe trying to get to f5, harassing this rook. But now we have queen b6. And Leela is getting in with all of her pieces. Knight c6, queen takes, queen a7. But the queen exchange doesn't really help Stockfish here. We have rook back, king d7, and now knight a4, making room for this rook to invade on the b file. If now Stockfish plays rook b8, then Leela can play knight b6 check, and after king c6 go back to g7 and attack like this, and after rook f8, she can just calmly play here g4, and if this king goes away, ventures away from d7, then the knight can go to d7, harass this rook, and Leela wins. So instead of rook b8, we had king c6, but now came rook b3, trying to get in, knight b5, shutting the door, but now we have knight c3, challenging the knight. They exchange the knights, rook a8, rook a3, king d7, a6, knight c6, and now g4. And Leela wants to play g5 and create a passed pawn. And with two outside passed pawns, this should be easy. The game continued with king e8, g5, h takes g, f takes g, king f8, king g4, king g7, king f4, king h7, bishop e1, king g7, bishop d2, rook a7, king g3, king g8, king h4, rook a8, and now finally h6. And Leela's idea here is to play king h5 and then g6, and then the pawn has to take, and once the king gets to g6, Leela will be in position to play bishop g5 with the idea to get to this diagonal and combine mating attacks with h7 with threatening to get a queen on h8, and black would lose, of course. Taking this pawn doesn't really help black, because after bishop c3 the problems on this diagonal are even bigger. So Stockfish didn't take this pawn, but instead played d4, trying to distract the white forces from this idea of queening the h-pawn. And indeed now here after bishop f4 and knight e7, Leela's queen went on to win this d4 pawn. King f3, king g6, king e4, and now knight c6 defending the pawn, bishop d2, and Leela's idea here is now to play king d3, king c4, and king b5, and then attack the knight and push the c pawn and the a pawn, and one of them should queen very, very soon. But here now we have d3. Stockfish is giving up the d pawn for the a pawn or the e5 pawn. Leela chose to take on d3, allowing knight e5. And now we have king c3, knight c6, king c4. And here again the threat is king b5, but now we have another check. King d4, knight c6, king c3, rook d8, bishop e3, rook a8, king c4, knight e5 check, king d4, knight c6, and here in this position the game was finally adjudicated as a win for Leela. Now winning this is a bit tricky, but the position is of course completely winning. Here white's problem here is that after king c4, knight e5 and king b5 trying to get things moving, black has this check, and these light squares are taken away, and the king is forced to a4 unless he wants to get mated. King a5 would be a mate, so that's not advised. But here after a4, black has rook a8, again threatening this pawn. But even this is winning for white after bishop c1 defending the rook, and then continuing with king b5. This would be, of course, winning for white in this position. But there are other ways to win. Here in the starting position after knight c6, the king can go to c3 and then try to get this bishop to this diagonal to not allow knight e5 check, and then get in with the king. For example, if the knight goes here, then bishop d4, and if the knight goes back, then king c4. And next white will just play king c3 and then king b5 and continue advancing those pawns. If rook b8 now, then a7 wins. This check is not dangerous at all, and if now the knight takes here, then white takes here, and white is winning. So a very, very nice game by Leela here against Stockfish, a strategic masterpiece, I would say, in the Tarrasch. Please subscribe, like and share, and check out some of the other games. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye bye.